Welcome to Atheist Talk, produced by Minnesota Atheists. During and at the end of this program, you'll see information where you can contact us to learn more about Minnesota Atheists and to get a free sample newsletter. There's a stereotype about atheists being wild hedonists, and it's true if your definition of hedonism is interesting debates and discussions. Our guest tonight is Dan Wegner. He's a Catholic and the founder and organizer of the Does God Exist Meetup, which is just such a forum for debate and discussion. So, welcome, Dan.
Thanks, August.
Yeah. So first let me ask you, are you a wild hedonist when it comes to interesting debate and discussion?
Well, I get wild during debates and discussion, but probably the hedonism side I probably leave out for that.
Okay. So for our viewers who don't know, what is a meetup?
A meetup basically centers around a website called meetup.com.
Okay.
It allows people to organize events online and then meet in the real world.
Okay. So you can go to meetup.com and you put in like your location and then the topic of interest, and it could be religion, it could be atheism, and it'll sort of search on the keywords. I'm trying to remember how I found out about your group, maybe because I belong to other meetups, and I don't know what the keyword is, but somehow I found out about you through Meetup, and I've been to most of your meetings.
Yeah, you have. It's been great. So Meetup could be really about knitting or anything. And once you're part of a Meetup, Meetup.com will send you notifications of meetups that they think you might be interested in. That's what might have happened.
Yeah. And the web address, the URL of yours is meetup.com/apologetics.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So how long has this meetup been in existence?
A little more than a year, I think. So.
Okay. And what would you say the purpose or premises of the Does God Exist meetup?
Well, I got into it. I was interested in the topic myself. I was trying to have conversations with people about faith in God, and I was encountering a lot of atheists and a lot of people who were maybe materialists or scientific in their approach, and I realized that I wasn't doing very well at communicating my ideas to them, so I started doing a little research and trying to figure out, well, how can I articulate my viewpoints? And that was really why I decided, well, maybe other people would be interested in this. And I actually thought I'd get a lot of Christians and religious people interested, and we have a few of those, but it's been interesting that about half of the people that attend are atheists, and they're interested to hear the topics and discuss them and discuss their point of view.
Yeah, you have a broad variety of Christians, everything from liberal to Catholic to young earth creationist, and then you've got atheists and agnostics, and there's one guy, delightful guy, who's a Baha'i.
Yep.
That shows up once in a while.
Yeah.
So, and it's open to anybody.
Oh, sure.
You know, that's one of the purposes of this program is I really like this meetup a lot, and I'm hoping other people will sign up and show up.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. I love doing it, and you know, we're all busy, but I think it's something that I've gotten a lot of enjoyment out of, and made, I think, real friends, people I agree with, people I disagree with on topics, but I think there's a lot of a common interest in uncovering ideas and exploring ideas.
So the group meets every month or two. Where does it meet?
We meet at Clada in Maple Grove. So Clada Restaurant, Clada
Irish pub or something.
Yeah, it's an Irish pub. So
it's kind of at the north end of the downtown area.
Yeah.
The old downtown area.
Yeah, it's right on Main Street, downtown Maple Grove.
Has it always met there? I was looking through your meetup website, and did you once try meeting at Boca?
Yeah, we met at Buca di Beppo, just down the street there. That was about a year ago. I thought people might enjoy a little change of pace, and it was a little different, you know. It's much more relaxed atmosphere. We didn't really have a good topic, so I thought we'd just, you know, have a little festive thing going on in December. And
yeah.
So that's
I wasn't at that one, but I'd be up for trying it again if the group wants to.
That sounds good.
So as of today, which is December 4th, 2014, there's been 12 of these meetups. and the 13th one is next week.
Yep.
Like I said, I've attended most of them. You've talked a little bit about why you set up the meetup, but what is your background?
I have a kind of an interesting background. I was raised in a Christian home, a Catholic home, and in my late teen years, my faith began to get reinvigorated, and I think a lot of people during that time, late 70s, early 80s, Catholicism maybe wasn't as interesting as some of the other Christian opportunities, and so I ended up leaving the Catholic Church and getting into evangelical Christianity of sort of a more fundamentalist slant, and did that for a number of years, and through a process of research and reading, I came to the conclusion that that the Catholic Church was Jesus's representation of Christianity, and I returned to the Catholic Church, and that was quite a long time ago. I couldn't even tell you how long ago. And since then, I've explored my faith, and that actually pretty much has to do with leading me to this experience. I also was involved in, I'm involved in open air presentations. Some people would call it street preaching.
Okay.
I do that at the University of Minnesota on a regular basis, and where I've met many atheists and had great discussions, which kind of opened the door to this experience too. So.
Okay. Well, yeah, at the University of Minnesota here in Minneapolis, there's quite a thriving atheist group.
I would imagine.
So, now these meetups, they're on Tuesdays. I think they're always on a Tuesday.
Yep.
And they run from 7 to 9.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts with you. You have a kind of a you've picked the topic and you've researched it. And I have to say, I'm really impressed and really like, I don't always agree with what you've, prepared, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But I really like how you present it, and you lay down your argument, and then we have a discussion, and everyone gets to say what they want, and usually we're pretty much done by 9, and that's kind of like the official end time. But then people just hang around, and we've been known to chat till 11. I mean, it's just so much fun.
Yeah. I think it's, for people who are interested in growing intellectually, these are great topics to explore and discuss and argue about.
Okay. Well, speaking of topics, let's dig into this a little more and get into some of the specific topics for some of the evenings. For some of these, we'll have a little more time than to give the title, but then others we'll dig into a little more with discussion. We'll see how our time goes.
Okay.
And the first one, and I didn't get to this one. This sounds great. Let's crush modern relativistic and materialistic idiocy. So what is that?
Well, like I said before, my understanding was that the meetups were going to be attended by a lot of Christians who were interested in apologetics, Christian apologetics, hence the name. Hence the URL, I should say. And so I was trying to, be a little, edgy and see if I could get a bunch of people to show up. And lo and behold, it still had a pretty good turnout of atheistic people. So.
Well, relativism, I think a lot of atheists would reject relativism too. Materialism, of course, we embrace that.
Sure.
So there would be a good discussion on those terms.
Yeah, so coming from my perspective, those are kind of the enemies to the faith, relativism and materialism.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. It also says that in the write-up of that meetup, which I didn't attend, you were going to talk about first cause arguments?
Yeah, I believe we actually did. That was a little while ago, and the brain isn't as young and nimble as it once was. So yeah, we talked about the basic concepts behind first cause and how that argument goes,
and that's typically like the number one argument for the existence of God is first cause. So you start to right off with the top thing right at the top, and then you move on in the second meetup. So one of the second heavy topics, it's called Good God, Can There Be a Moral Law Without a Moral Lawgiver? And that's another big argument from believers.
Yeah, the moral argument's a really powerful one because it's kind of separates the men from the boys, or however you want to put it, the wheat from the chaff, because you really can't, from a Christian perspective, you either have an objective moral truth or you have a subjective moral truth. And if there's objective morality, then there needs to be an objective lawgiver, objective moral source.
Yeah, that's a very, very good way of framing the argument. Of course, we atheists beg to differ on that.
Sure.
We don't, well, personally, I don't use words like moral or immoral, right or wrong, or ethical or unethical. I use helpful and harmful. And we can very often, it's kind of a utilitarian approach, and you can often see if what you're doing is hurting someone or helping somebody. And that's just observation. You don't need any gods for that. So that's kind of our brief rebuttal.
Right.
And of course, I think I was at that one, we easily spent all evening just on all of these.
It's a great topic of discussion. There's plenty of paths to go down and great opportunities to discuss ideas.
Okay. Well, here's an argument that probably not a lot of people have heard of, and I found it a lot of fun to talk about. You get these great titles. I love this. I can't get no satisfaction, the argument from desire.
Right.
What is that?
That was a good one. We saw a few new faces at that meetup, and basically that was probably best articulated by C.S. Lewis. The idea that we have something in our lives that we desire, and so we have a lot of things that we desire. If we desire a steak, lo and behold, a steak exists. If we desire love, we believe love exists. If we desire peace and freedom must exist. And if we desire something in our hearts that nothing on earth can exist, well, then something like that must exist. So there must be something outside of the here and now. There must be something that can only fill that desire, and that desire would be filled by God. So.
Yeah, I mean, so the argument, how can you have a desire for something that doesn't exist in some fashion?
Correct.
The argument is that wouldn't make any sense.
Right.
And so a lot of people seem to have this, what's sometimes called a God-shaped hole in their hearts, or a yearning for something, transcendent, non-material, spiritual, whatever you want to call it. And so your argument is that we wouldn't have this yearning if there wasn't something there to fulfill it. Our bodies or minds wouldn't recognize, you don't have a hunger for food unless there's food.
Correct.
Kind of a thing.
Yep.
So I had never heard of that argument. I found that was a lot of fun to talk about. And I think, as I recall, our response, the atheist response, was that this was sort of a hunger for an ideal, and an ideal might not exist. The lesser states, like, okay, we can have earthly justice, and we might have a longing for perfect justice, and that doesn't exist. Or compassion exists, but universal compassion, love, unconditional love, examples of love exist, and we can easily project that into a perfect thing and even imagine a perfect being. But our response would be, that doesn't mean that perfect being actually exists.
Right.
And feelings of transcendence could be also considered feelings of euphoria. And euphoria, we can talk about what chemicals cause euphoria, and people like to get, and actually it's not just humans aren't the only animals like to get high. I mean, there are other animals in the wild that like fermented this or that.
Sure.
And so that's kind of the atheist response. And of course, we're not doing full justice to any of these topics. And just these little, I just want to give the audience a taste. And hope that they'll come for more.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. The two biggest arguments for atheists are, the biggest one is the problem of evil. And I'm glad you addressed this, everyone addresses that, but I'm glad you recognized the second one, the argument from divine hiddenness, in which you acknowledge it is the second best argument for non-belief. In other words, if there's an all-powerful God and he wants us to know him, why is there silence? The argument from silence.
Right.
Either he doesn't want us to know us, or he's not powerful enough to make himself known, or he doesn't know how to make himself known in a way that would convince us. And so that's the atheist argument. And I forget what the Christian or religious response to that was.
You know, this was the beginning of kind of my search into philosophy. Was a very similar argument, and I'm not very well read, only on the topics I want to read. But one of the things I was starting to think about was, why doesn't everyone believe in God? A very similar point, and because God would be powerful enough to make that happen. And a similar argument is why miracles aren't so prevalent. And I came up with my own philosophy, my own argument, and it was based on the junkyard dog. And so you'd be walking up to the fence of the junkyard. I think I saw this in Stand By Me, which was based on a Stephen King. And I think the boy walks up to the fence, and all of a sudden the big old German Shepherd jumps out and leaps out at the fence and growls, and the kid steps back. Okay. And I'd step back and you'd step back. We'd all have that same response. That's just part of our nature. Mm-hmm. I think that's true also if miracles were commonplace or God wasn't hidden. We would have an uncontrollable need to placate that God, whether it was out of love or out of fear. I don't think that would be in our, we would do it. We would just do it, and it would probably be out of fear. Scripture has a story of that with Ananias and Sapphira. So God strikes them both dead and says the fear of God filled the land. Well, that doesn't mean everybody in that land was, loved God and entered into his plan for salvation or what have you. Just means that. But
at least they would acknowledge his existence.
Yeah, but that's not God's goal.
Yeah, I mean, there are many ways that a God could manifest himself to me that I would acknowledge, hey, there is a God. And it could be a frightening way, the junkyard dog way, or it could be a nice way.
Sure.
Whatever. But this God was not philosophically opposed to doing miracles in the old Bible, tremendous of, Hollywood miracles of biblical proportions.
Correct.
As you say, why have these miracles seemingly dried up? So I still think it's a good argument.
We'll have to maybe we'll come back around to that.
Yeah, I was going to say that some of these topics are definitely worth revisiting.
Yep, I agree.
Especially with the new crew that we're going to get from the show.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, the next meetup, probably one of the very top arguments after first cause for theists is the argument from design.
Yeah, that's a really popular argument, and there's kind of two threads to it. I'm not a big fan of it, at least the way most people do it. It's referred to as the Paley argument. It's just, I don't think it's compelling, and some people would just, some people their jaws are dropping right now to hear me say that.
Exactly.
But I think some of it's compelling. The idea of fine-tuning is compelling, but not necessarily in the way that's going to move the heart. That's my perspective.
I mean, basically, if there's a watch, there's a watchmaker. Things in life and the world seem designed and maybe even fine-tuned. Yep. So there must be a designer.
And I think it's useful, but I don't find it compelling.
Yeah. I'm going to skip ahead here. I can't even remember if I attended it. Why first principles matter? What is that?
Well, I think what happens sometimes is we either two extremes. One, we assume first principles. We assume that one of our meetup, I don't think he'd mind me talking about him obliquely. He very strongly believes in the authority of Scripture, and sometimes he thinks that's a first cause, or a first principle that, but it's not a universal first principle. It might be a first principle for him, but it's not going to be a first principle that everybody universally accepts. So it's important that we can all come to agreement on this idea of first principles, like we can trust our senses, or that reason is something we can rely on. You know, these are first principles that are important. If we just say, oh, you know, we're all being duped by our own intellect, well, then it leaves us nowhere, and we don't really have anything to talk about anymore. We're just,
yeah.
You know,
I think the atheist response is we come up with models of the world, and they might be pure guesses at first, and then we test them. And the more tests that they pass, the more confidence we have in that model. And, you know, millennia ago, we came up with the God model. God did it. And for atheists, that model has not passed to the tests very well. And so we've rejected that model. For theists, it does pass tests. That's why they believe it.
Right, right,
so,
of course.
Now here's one you call one of your favorite arguments, the argument from time and contingency. What is that?
Okay, so the idea is that, you know, of course, we're stretching my memory here, but when I say it's my favorite, because I read it and I liked it, not that it resides in my brain all the time, but I think I can recreate it. So the idea is that we believe that, I think, I caveat, this might be absolutely incorrect, but the idea is that things have either existed forever, material always existed, or matter was created. But assuming that something always existed, that eventually, if that being had an opportunity to exist or not exist, what we call a contingent being. So, you know, everything that we see, you know, I'm a contingent being. The camera is a contingent being. It could either exist or not exist. Okay. That over time, given enough time, an infinite amount of time, everything would cease to exist, and everything that's contingent. So the only thing that would exist forever would be a non-contingent being. Of course, we would say that's God, by definition, and so that's kind of the basis of the time and contingency argument. And I could go into it more, but
is that at all connected to God being a necessary being, or is that a different argument?
Yeah, very similar. So, yeah, contingent being, a necessary being, or a non-contingent being, and a necessary being would be very similar. Okay. So,
well, let's get a little less esoteric and down to earth here. The meetup number 10 is faith in God reasonable? Right.
I think one of the things that we need to discuss is whether. A lot of people approach God simply because they have affinity towards the idea of God. And that's good and that's fine for people. But I think the question goes deeper. What if you don't have an affinity towards God? Can a reasonable argument be made for the existence of God? And is it based on things like faith or belief or revelation, or can it just be based on reason?
Now here's one of my favorites. Does the question of God's existence really matter? And I think it depends on what God is. It might not matter. There could be a God who's perfectly fine with atheists, who doesn't care if we recognize him or worship him or anything like that. We can't, I don't see how we can know if God's existence matters. What would you think about that?
So God's, you know, so this is a common misconception. So God's concern with us worshiping him isn't for him. So philosophically saying, we say that God is, you know, he lacks nothing. He doesn't need our worship. He doesn't need our praise.
Okay.
So his interest in us worshiping him is for our benefit, because that would be just. It would obviously be just for the creation to worship the Creator. So it puts our lives in order to worship God. And so that's why he commands it. And to do otherwise is unjust. And so it's, you know, it's not for him. but it's still just.
Well, I could see if you believe in a God, it would affect your life, how you interacted with that God or that belief in God, appreciating his wonders, kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. But now, for someone like me, who has natural explanations for a lot of things and doesn't see the supernatural as an explanation for anything, God's existence doesn't matter to me. I mean, right. You'd have to tell me why, what difference it would make. You'd have to tell me what does God explain that's not being explained, and how does God explain something, or what benefit is it to me to believe in whatever God you want to pick.
Yeah. So again, and that kind of goes back to the purpose of the meetup. And one of the things I think that we have in common is our desire for truth. And so you shouldn't believe in God for something you'll get out of it, for some, whether that be an explanation or some kind of divine perk or materialistic perk. We should believe in God because it's true, and we shouldn't believe in God if it's not true. So, because truth...
Well, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I knew you would.
Yeah.
And that's why we can have these great meetups. Yeah. So the question and the purpose of the meetup is to uncover and to put forth the best arguments that have been put out there for a long time on why we should believe that God exists and why it's true that God exists.
Okay. Well, we got a minute left.
Okay.
What were your expectations of this meetup, and do you think it's met your expectations?
My expectation,
or exceeded them, maybe.
Yeah, I think my expectation had to do with wanting to create an opportunity for people to learn about the arguments for the existence of God and how to share their faith, and that's not what I got. Really, what I got was an opportunity for people of differing beliefs to come together to discuss what may be, whether or not we want to, whether or not we like it, some of the most important topics of our time, of millennia really, and discuss them and do so in a respectful manner, but not be afraid to, slam a fist on the table if it makes a point.
That's the fascinating thing about these, is people get very passionate, but it doesn't get personal.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah, and so they're very enthusiastic about their point of view, but then they'll be quiet and then let someone else talk. And I never thought I could enjoy the company of a young Earth creationist, but he's a fun guy.
He's a great guy
to hang around.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks, Dan, for being our guest on Atheist Talk. It's been great chatting with you. And if people want to, again, contact the Does God Exist Meetup, it's meetup.com/apologetics.
Correct.
Okay. And the group is free and open to join. So by all means, look it up on the website. And thank you for tuning in to Atheist Talk, produced by Minnesota Atheists. There'll be contact information where you can learn more about our group, including receiving a free sample newsletter. And remember, if you're interested in us, we're interested in you.